Hi, and it's live. Welcome to Meet the Candidates Day 2020. I'm one of your intrepid hosts today, Todd Varwick, and with me is my inimitable partner in crime, Mr. Mark Shaw. Say hi, Mark.
Hi, how are you?
So between the two of us today, we're going to be talking to 12, 13 people running for state public office. Now, what we're going to do is I will announce them and what race they're running for. And candidates were given three choices on appearing today. The first choice was to pre-record something to send to us so that you can view it and make your own decision about what it is that they... I believe we're waiting for real-time captioning to start. Hold one moment. Where is my real-time captioning? Sorry, folks. Modern technology, we want this to be accessible for everyone. So real-time captioning is being provided directly here on the stream for those folks who are deaf and hard of hearing, but I don't see myself talking. Deep down backstage at the back end of the stream, we have a nice lady named Jillian Moss. Jillian Moss is probably scrambling around trying to figure out what to do because I'm notifying that the closed captioning isn't working. And I can't explain to you guys how this works unless everybody can see my explanation. So we're just going to ask people to be patient while the stream rolls forward, and we're going to get this done. Testing. I see testing. This is good. All righty. Where's my captioning? I'm still waiting. There we go. Now I can see them.
Yes.
So let's start this from the top, shall we? Welcome to Meet the Candidates Day 2020. I'm one of your intrepid co-hosts, Todd Varwick, Chief Policy Officer at West New York Independent Living. My intrepid co-host is Mark Shaw, who is the Disability Rights Advocate for Independent Living of Niagara County. Today, we're going to be talking to approximately 13 candidates for public office. Candidates were offered three ways of appearing today. The first was to record something themselves and send it to us, and we will play it for you. The second way of doing that is we were offered them an opportunity to do a brief interview with advocates, and that then they would be recorded for 10 minutes with questions being asked by the advocates. We had a couple of people who took up the option to do that. And the third is to appear live today on stream. So your involvement is critically important for those people that are live today, because we're going to take our questions not only from our standard question list, but from you. So if you want to ask a question of a candidate, please put it in the Facebook chat or the YouTube live chat. Our friend Jillian Moss is going to catch that and send that to me here on StreamYard, and then we will ask the question of the candidate. Normally, we give candidates about 10 minutes in appearance here. We're going to try and keep to that. A lot of our recorded stuff is less than 10 minutes. So I expect that our live folks will probably, in some cases, take more than 10 minutes. So it'll all balance itself out. Why don't we get started and actually kind of be on time and open with the video provided by our friend Patrick Burke. Patrick Burke is currently the member of the Assembly in the 142nd District, which includes West Seneca. So why don't we play Patrick's video, and then if people have any questions that we can answer, we would be happy to take them. Go ahead, Julian.
Hi, everyone. This is New York State Assemblyman video to answer some of the questions that you had for me. It's a little bit different this year with COVID-19. We're just all doing the best we can. And so thank you for hearing me out. Thank you for sending questions. And here we go. Okay. So the first question is, what is this?
Okay, Julian, I'm going to have you stop this for a second, okay? I want to figure out if that's a problem with the video as we received it, or whether it's a problem that we're having with our feed and with StreamYard. So let's go to Michael Norris, and we will come back to Patrick. Michael Norris is running in the member of the assembly for the 144th district, which represents folks that come from Mark Shaw's location, right, Mark?
Yep. He's the eastern part of Niagara County, Lockport, I believe Newfane out that way, Middleport.
Okay, so why don't we start with Mr. Norris?
Hello, this is Mike Norris, your New York State Assemblyman from the 144th District, which comprises of parts of Erie, Niagara, and Orleans counties. I live in Lockport, and I'm very proud to represent all of you in the New York State Assembly. I've been privileged to be there now for 4 years. I can tell you, every year, I look forward to the opportunity for when the Western New York Independent Living Team comes and visits my office, and we get to discuss the issues that are very, very important to the clients and to have a full discussion of them. I also remember very clearly the importance of making sure we provide for affordable and adequate housing for the clients. And I also had very lengthy discussions, and I know this is very, very important, from a cost measure as well for the state budget, to able to provide individuals with affordable and adequate housing so they can live independently and in their own surroundings at a much lower cost than those in a nursing home facility. And I'm always very disappointed to hear that sometimes people are forced into the nursing homes, which costs way too much, and they're actually able to be out on their own. So that's something that I have discussed with all of you when I've been in Albany, and I've been working on as a member of the New York State Assembly, because I think it's very important, both from a cost measure and a quality of life, that we provide affordable and accessible housing to those who are able to live independently in their homes. Also, transportation. I know this is a very big concern, to make sure clients are able to get to the doctors, to the grocery store, to other situations and events within the community. And we need to make sure we have proper public transportation avenues, particularly I know within Niagara County and Erie County, and I will continue to work with the different agencies and through our state budget to make sure we provide for adequate and proper transportation needs for these clients. And another thing that's very important to me, and I've discussed it and I've seen it firsthand, are to make sure we have employment opportunities for these clients who are able to go out and work in the field. It's very, very important, and it brings great joy, I know, to the businesses as well as the clients, to have the clients working right there in our community. And I've seen it firsthand, and it's also something I want to work with our business community to provide for adequate tax cuts and tax credits for those businesses who provide the services to allow individuals who are able to work within these businesses. So again, I have been just privileged and honored to represent all of you in the New York State Assembly. I look forward to continuing my service for the next 2 years, and I look forward to having your vote and your support, and also your continued advocacy because I've gotten so much out of it. The visits that you've come to my office, both in the district and then in Albany, we've had discussions over the telephone and through emails. Thank you, because it is very, very important to me, and I want you to continue to reach out to me and have these discussions so I can continue to advocate for you on the floor of the assembly and while working with my colleagues in a bipartisan manner.
Okay, that's remarks from Michael Norris. As an incumbent, we've worked with the Assemblyman for a number of years, and I know that strongly states his position and experience in working with people with disabilities. So I can take comments about the video you just saw from the chat or from the phone if somebody wishes to make a comment, while I allow Jillian to move to the video for our next person. Jillian, do we want to try Patrick again? There we go. We're going to try him again in a different viewer this time, right? Okay, so here we go. This is Patrick Burke, member of Assembly for the 142nd District.
Hi, everyone. This is New York State Assemblyman Pat Burke. I'm doing a little selfie video to answer some of the questions that you had for me. It's a little bit different this year with COVID-19. We're just all doing the best we can. So thank you for hearing me out. Thank you for sending questions. And here we go. Okay. So the first question is, what is the single asset that you bring with you to the office? I would say, I don't know if I could narrow it down to just one thing, but I would say it's like all of us, it's a composite of our life and our experiences and who we are. For me, I didn't come from a privileged background. So, I grew up in South Buffalo. We didn't have much money growing up. We didn't, we certainly struggled. And so for me, I think, understanding what it's like to be down is a great benefit for me. Understanding that, so everything me and my family have, we worked really hard for and we fought for. So it gives me a different perspective on life a little bit. And it also gives me the advantage of, being down. Politics for some folks can seem scary. And I don't think so, because I know what it's like to have, to live through some hard things. And so I think that's actually been a great advantage for me going into the political arena and looking at things and just saying, okay, I can handle this, because I've handled much worse in my life. And then secondarily, I would say my experience, I was a county legislator for 5 years, and then I've been a state assemblyman for nearly 2 years, and hopefully if I get reelected, I'll be I'll be in my second term there. And so not just jumping from private life to public life in the state legislature, starting off in the county gave me an opportunity to develop my skill set, to understand how to navigate through difficult circumstances and through trying to get legislation passed and what it takes to do that. So that I think if I had to just say two things, I would say those give me some advantages, and those are some of the assets I bring to the office. All right, next question. What do we got? How will you increase the understanding and sensitivity for the issues of persons with disabilities should you be elected? Well, I've already done that. So when I was a county legislator, the county had the Office of the Disabled. And I noticed that and recognized it and decided to change the name. So through a resolution, I changed the name of the Office of the Disabled to the Office of Persons with Disabilities. And the obvious effort there is to change the mindset that people have, and not to define people by one thing about them. So if someone has a disability, they are a person with a disability. They're not a disabled person. And I think it's really important. The language we use is really important. And I want to make it clear to everyone in our community that we don't limit people. Everyone has a role to play and a contribution to give in our society. And we see it over and over again. once you give them the opportunity. Okay. Third question. What will you do to increase access for persons with disabilities to your office should you be elected? Again, already being in the position, I've made every effort to do that. Certainly, I've been working with the NFTA, and it's been a challenge, to be honest with you, to increase access for people with disabilities. They have some unique challenges, and not having a functioning NFTA system is really limits their ability to get around. And in a sprawled out community like Buffalo and Western New York, where the population is not necessarily all in the urban core, where you have someone who has to get to work, but bus schedules and bus hours and bus routes are not to the level they should be, and not to the timeliness that they should be, is a real problem, especially for someone with a disability. So I've worked on legislation, and we've been trying to get that passed. It's not easy. Certainly, while we have budget issues with the state, it's made it more challenging during this COVID environment that we're in. But I'm trying to do everything in my power with my office to make that a reality and improve the transportation abilities of everyone, especially people who have a disability. Okay. Let's see here. Next question. What are your funding priorities in the New York State budget? Well, I would generally say my priority now is making sure that we get resources in the New York State budget. So we are deeply underwater. We are in a fiscal crisis because of COVID. And so we need the federal government to do right by us, by every New Yorker. Unfortunately, we're seeing this sort of awful political game being played where we're no longer just Americans or even New Yorkers, we're blue staters because it's considered a democratic state. So to have a federal administration unwilling to really help because they don't think it's politically beneficial to them, which basically means because of politics, they're willing to cause harm to New Yorkers, we have to call it for what it is, and we have to fight that. And so I'm using my office to fight that. But in the meantime, if we can't rely on our own federal government to help us in our time of need, then we also have to get creative. And so some people would say get creative and find ways to cut things. But when you really look at the needs of New York, like, what are you going to cut? Are you going to cut schools? I don't think so. Are you going to cut funding for hospitals or healthcare? Like, that's not acceptable to me. Are you going to cut transportation? No. So there are greater needs. There are no creative ways to cut without causing pain to real people. What we've seen is billionaire wealth skyrocket during this pandemic. And so what we need to do, if we're going to find revenue, it's going to be with an ultra millionaires tax. It's going to be with the stock transfer tax. The people who are making more and more money now are going to have to pay their fair share and help their fellow citizens in New York. So that's my priority right now, and that's what we'll continue to fight for. So I think I'm running over my time, but I just want to say thank you very much for allowing me to answer a few questions, and I hope you have a great day. All right, take care.
And that's what happens when you forget to unmute your microphone. All right, that was Patrick Burke, Assemblyman for the 142nd District, and we apologize for needing to run him twice. Some of you folks, especially on the phone, the volume might be really low. I want to make sure you all know that each of these videos are going to be posted separately on our West New York Independent Living YouTube page for you to listen to at your leisure. My apologies. The audio patches may not be as loud as we would like. All right, so we do want to encourage you, if there's a candidate you're particularly interested in, to go to the YouTube page and look for him. Let's move to Karen McMahon, incumbent member of the Assembly for the 146th District. There's Karen. There we go. A moment while she arranges things. And away we go.
Todd and everyone at the Western New York Independent Living Center. for the opportunity to address you briefly today. The COVID pandemic has really upended all our lives, and I regret that I cannot be with you in person. I am the New York State Assemblywoman from the 146th District, which is the towns of Amherst and Pendleton. I was elected in 2018, and I'm just finishing up my first term. Prior to that, I worked for almost 30 years as a law clerk to judges of the New York State Appellate Division and the United States District Court in Buffalo. When I retired from federal court in 2016, I joined my husband's private law practice, representing parents of students with disabilities in special education cases. So I spent my entire legal career administering justice, upholding the rule of law, and advocating for the underrepresented. My priorities include quality public education, affordable health care, job growth in Western New York, and initiatives to protect our environment and combat climate change. I believe personally that people with disabilities have the same rights as all citizens: lives of dignity and respect, a free, appropriate public education, employment opportunities, personal autonomy, and meaningful social relationships. I've always advocated for the rights of people with disabilities and will continue to do so. I've made every effort to meet with constituents with disabilities, self-advocates, and advocacy groups. I've visited residents of group homes in their homes, and I've heard the stories of parents and caregivers. I would like to see more housing for people with disabilities integrated into our neighborhoods, and transportation options that better serve their rehabilitation and socializing needs. People with disabilities should enjoy the economic and social equality that all other New Yorkers experience. The COVID-19 pandemic has upended everything for everyone this year, including daily routines for people with disabilities. I'm concerned about the effects of isolation and disruption. To protect our most vulnerable population from the coronavirus, I've called for COVID-19 testing at all OPWDD facilities and zip codes with high positivity rates. My philosophy shapes my priorities as a public official. Similarly, a budget is a statement of a society's priorities. New York has shown itself to be a leader in supporting people with disabilities, but there's always more to be done. So often, the issues come down to funding. Direct support staff who provide critical daily services should earn a living wage. But my philosophy is not just words. I've also put it into action during my first term in the Assembly. Specifically, I made a budget funding request earlier this year for the expansion at the Summit Center in Amherst. Summit provides an alternative school experience for school-age students with autism and severe behavioral disorders. I secured funding for a disability awareness training program for police officers and other first responders to ensure that they can effectively help all residents, regardless of ability or medical condition. I'm a co-sponsor of a new bill in the state legislature that would require school districts to provide educational and support services to students with disabilities until such students turn 22. This summer, I advocated for more federal funding for behavioral health and substance abuse disorders. My letter to New York's two U.S. senators was supported by 20 of my Assembly colleagues. I look forward to continuing these efforts and more during another term as the representative in the Assembly from the 146th District. I thank you for this opportunity to share my views, and best wishes to everyone. Thank you.
Now, we're supposed to have a couple of people live due to come in, but they don't appear to be backstage at the moment. So we're going to continue to run the videos we have until our live candidates arrive. Up and coming on our list is Robert Pecoraro, who is running for a member of the Assembly in the 140th District. And in the same race, also live, is Anthony Bainey. And hopefully they're going to be here soon. After that, Congressman Chris Jacobs is due to be here, but I don't have either of them backstage right now. Jillian is going to confirm that for me, I think, as I quietly wait for the secret word from, nope. All righty, so we're going to go to the next video we have. And this is Edward Rath running for New York State Senate in the 61st district?
I'm Ed Rath, and I'm running for the New York State
Hold on. He's not sized yet. There we go.
Independent Living for hosting this event and allowing me to speak to everyone here today. It is an honor. I have been a county legislator for 13 years, and I have a proven track record of being an advocate for the people and working across party lines to deliver for the community. Collaboration and listening to the needs of a constituency is extremely important to me. I am proud to be an honest leader you can trust. I believe my experience as a county legislator and my time in the private sector have prepared me to be a state senator. Workforce development is extremely important. Fitting people with disabilities into jobs that are best for them is critical. I believe that a partnership with the private sector to help place individuals would be remarkably successful. I also believe that it is important to increase hiring credits for businesses who hire those with disabilities. While answering these questions, I think it's most important to note that proper funding for providers and services that these people rely on is crucial. This is the only way to ensure that we have as many opportunities as possible. Perhaps equally as important is working with providers and families to assure that these programs are working the way that they should. Also looking for creative ways to integrate these individuals into the community. All of this, if done correctly with the right funding and resources, I believe will have a snowball effect. Another important aspect is accountability. We need to make sure that the state is doing its due diligence so that fraud and waste is being rooted out of the system. Those who need it most must receive the state's resources. Transparency is also needed. This includes how any wait list is managed, how beds are filled, and how they communicate these decisions with families. I will work with community stakeholders and those who know the issues best on education and awareness. I will fight for a more transparent process to assure that you have a seat at the table. Those in need of placement should have choices when it comes to housing and what is best for the individual, such as an apartment or long-term care. Often, the lack of opportunity does not allow for options, and individuals are being placed into situations that might not be best for them. Housing placement should depend on what is best for the individual. So again, we need to invest in these resources. We need to assure that when beds are available, they are filled quickly, appropriately, and transparently. The state budget is a list of priorities, and these priorities need to be well thought out and evaluated. My top 3 funding priorities will be services to the most vulnerable, schools and education, and third, public safety. As far as the $5 million for New York State Independent Living, I would support that initiative. Again, thank you to Western New York Independent Living for this opportunity, and thank you to everyone who's watching. For more information on me and my campaign, please visit Ed Rath for Senate. Thank you.
Hey, Todd. Just want to let you know that you're muted.
That's what happens once again. I mute myself so that I'm not talking over them when they speak, and I forget to unmute my line. But what I do want to do is give the people on the feeds an opportunity to give us comment about what you're hearing or what you're not hearing. We as the advocates, we will probably be meeting with these people after they're elected into public office. It's good to know what you heard from their remarks and what you didn't. If you're on the phone, you can pass your question to Dan Colpoys. If you're in the feeds, Jillian is going to take that and feed that back to me here on StreamYard. I really want to know what people are thinking, and I want to be able to tell other people what people are thinking so far. So let's take a couple of minutes to do that. Mark, what was the big thing you've heard out of our candidates so far?
But they all seem to be on our side as the disabled group, and they want to work to support us, help support us through any means that it sounds possible.
I myself am hearing a lot of buzzwords, but I don't think I hear them go far enough. I still hear some very kind of caretaking language, but I know that that's something that sometimes can be easily corrected. Do you think you're hearing some of that too?
Yeah.
Come on, friends and neighbors. No comments? Nothing from the feeds yet? I wonder if we need to give them another candidate to chew on. Actually, let's move up Jackie Berger. I'm gonna do a little explanation for this one. Jackie did ask for an interview to be done with advocates, but on the day that she was available to record it, the only advocate that was available was me. So, in addition to noting that it's recorded from a very different place, and my home office looks more like a classic 60s Bat villain lair than I would like to kind of admit. This is a conversation between me and the candidate as opposed to a pre-prepared video. And right after that, there we go. And recognize that my camera is not necessarily always located where you think it's located. So while I'm looking away from the candidate on the camera, which is kind of funny, I actually can directly see them through the entire conversation. So if we're ready, this is Jackie Berger, current Amherst Assistant Supervisor running for State Senator in the 61st District. And while we do this, comments about what you're hearing are strongly encouraged.
Today, for our candidate for Meet the Kansas State, we have Miss Jackie Berger. Jackie is currently the Assistant Supervisor of the town of Amherst?
Deputy.
Deputy. I always get those titles mixed up. Okay, Jackie, this starting part is the part you want to talk about your platform. So we'll give you, I don't know, 3-4 minutes.
Okay. Well, I just want to introduce myself, though I think there are a good number of people who will be watching this that know me. I have spent my life as an advocate for people with disabilities. I am a certified special education teacher, though I haven't been doing that in a while. And I'm on the faculty of SUNY Empire State College. And one of the areas that I teach is disability studies. So I've been
That's very good to know.
I've been very active in the movement for a long time. I really got involved in the disability movement when my brother was learning disabled in the 60s, when no one knew what to do with someone with a learning disability. And so I saw the problems he had. And I think that's how I naturally moved into teaching and being an advocate. And in college, I helped advocate for and then educate people on the original version of IDEA when it was 94-142. That means something to you, but not to most people.
For our viewers, that's the original number for IDEA. It used to be called the Education for All Handicapped Children's Act.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've always done work relating to kids in education. I was often a problem for the people I worked with because I worked for the school districts, because I advocated for what people needed as opposed to what they wanted to give. And back then they didn't give much. So as time went on, I just continued to be an advocate. I continue to advocate now. I was just on an IEP meeting earlier this week as an advocate. I've traveled the state or called in to work with people because I think it's really important that people get what they need. And I also have done a lot of advocacy for adults. There are a number of self-advocates that I've worked with and helped over the years when they've run into challenges. But in general, I got elected to the town board and became was appointed deputy supervisor. And this seat became an open seat, and people saw this as an opportunity for me to take a lot of issues to the state level. So some of the issues that are really important to me that would matter in particular to this community is education, including special education, and people with disabilities. The current issues with services now are a challenge. There's lots of reasons it's a challenge, irrelevant of the budget cuts, and which we'll probably talk about a little later,
Right.
or the budget holds, I should call them.
Right. We're about ready to do the questions. Are you ready for that?
Sure.
All right. So we're going to pull stuff right out of the speech. So the governor's talking about and is doing 20% withholds on services with state money. It's affecting all the services for people with disabilities. People are worried that the reduced amount of money is going to become the new baseline, the new normal. As a potential state senator, what do you say about that?
Well, I'm adamantly against it. One of the things I think they made a real mistake with saying we're making cuts across the board. Everybody's getting this 20% hold. You need to look at where it should be. And we also need to think about people. People should come first. And we should look at what the needs are. We don't want people to lose their housing. We don't want people to lose the services and supports that they need. That's critical for you to function in society, whether you're living at home, in a residential program. We need to look at all of that. And I do think there are places in the state budget where there can be more strategic reorganization and cuts than hurting individuals.
Right. Okay. So one of the other questions that that comes from our consumer base involves the reorganization of policing. People with disabilities have equal amount of concerns in terms of some of their interactions with police. And we know that moving forward, policing is going to be done in a different way. So I wanted to see if I could get your thoughts on that.
Well, it's an interesting question in terms of how to do it statewide. We've done a number of things in the town of Amherst where we've provided training and supports, disability awareness training, first responder training, so that people know some of what they're supposed to do. But what we really need to look at, instead of funding cuts, we need funding increases for police departments so they can have social workers and mental health workers available. Sign language interpreters, foreign language interpreters as well. So that way, when the need happens, those miscommunications don't happen. People don't need to be shot or injured because there's a barrier. And when people are in a mental health crisis, there are lots of ways to deal with that, where you may need police support, but let someone else take the lead and decide when it's becoming too dangerous, and have the police out of sight or way far away in the background so that they're not front and center,
Right.
Upsetting someone even more.
Okay. I know that you've got interest in housing issues as well as education. So this next question kind of goes into a little bit about COVID, because we know that currently there's an eviction moratorium. Okay. And we know that budgets have changed a lot, especially for people with disabilities on fixed income, where costs have gone up in order to get things that they need for the pandemic. Whether it's gloves, which are really hard to come by if somebody's living at home or living in a place where they need gloves. Difficulty in getting food because going out is becoming more of a production. But eventually, that prohibition is going to end. And there are going to be people that are going to be owing, I would think, substantial amounts of money. What would you want to do for the community when the moratorium on residential evictions lifts?
Well, ideally, we need federal funding, but I'm not counting on that. I'm realistic. I mean, one thing is that when I sit down and talk to people and people know me, I'm realistic about what we can and can't do. So I'm not counting on anything from the federal government, because if we even get something, it may be too late. So one of the things the town of Amherst has done, which I would like to see more communities do, is we took some of our federal funding sources, some of our block grant money, some of our HUD money, and we're providing rent assistance to people who apply and show a need. And I think that could be done more widely in terms of looking at the resources you have and use that.
Are you aware that the town of Amherst has changed the parameters on that program to restrict it to students, foreign-born students, and punting people that have already applied to the county program that provides the same supports?
No, I did not realize that happened, because I know we just discussed someone the other day where there was a concern. I know one of the things the town is doing is trying to maximize the supports. And so we may be, if the county has more money available, which as far as I know right now, the county does, and we have lots of students, particularly foreign students, who were about to be homeless. So we needed to help them as well. So that may be what happened, but we need to look at those kinds of programs countywide, throughout the district, throughout the state, as well as towns and cities that can find the resources to do it. And it was a lot of creative work on the part of some town employees to find that money.
Absolutely. Last question, and this one's a simple one. What differentiates you from your opponent?
Well, my lifelong advocacy for people, particularly people with disabilities, and that I feel everyone has a right to live, participate, play, work in the community, and we need to create the spaces to do that and the supports. And that, I believe, is the responsibility of the state working with individuals.
Wonderful. I think this is great. I want to thank you for coming on behalf of the consumers of West New York Independent Living, and good luck in your campaign. I want to thank everybody for listening, and I'll see you with the next candidate.
Thank you.
Hi everybody. I'm Mark from Independent Living of Niagara County. One of the things that has come in, a comment that has come in, people want to hear more about LPWDD funding and what Assembly and Senate are are going to talk to Governor Cuomo in negotiations for funding. Personally, I feel like that's definitely hot button topic, so to speak. Because office persons with developmental disabilities, OPWDD, well, individuals with disabilities or developmental disabilities, face extra challenges, extra financial challenges, and as we saw in the last video, I think that hang on just a minute. Totally lost that train of thought. I don't know. But yes, I do believe that individuals with disabilities across the board face greater challenges, and just about every which way you look at things, and especially when it comes to financially. So that's and something in my mind at least really need to have like a strong foundation to negotiate with the governor on funding for such programs as OPWDD and other disability programs. Well, there's a comment. Somebody commented that to explain the differences between what we hear in the primary versus what we hear in the general election campaigns. I don't honestly can honestly answer that, but my best educated guess would be that the candidates put out what they think we want to hear, are kind of like put their feelers out, so to speak, as maybe issues they want to think we might want to hear about, or hear them talk about, and then they tailor it and change it to and for the general election to really hone in and target on their audiences. I could be wrong, but that is my best educated guess on that one. Well, there are some questions coming in on the telephone lines, and there are questions on the candidate's stances on COVID and the pandemic, and people would like to hear. I personally also would like to hear their stances on COVID and on the pandemic, and how we're facing severely challenging times, to put it very nicely, at this point in our world. And I really would like to hear how they're gonna try to combat this. We're and fighting in the fight for our lives and the fight for the nation, as Joe Biden says, and his one campaign thing that pops up all the time. And I would really like to know how all these politicians are gonna come together, if how they want to work together, because like I've heard it said, it's not red or blue states anymore. We're all Americans. Plain and simple, we're all Americans. Like I tell my groups for anger management and other groups, look, we don't all have to agree with each other's opinions and our ideas and thoughts and what have you, but we have to be respectful of each other's differences. If we're all the same, we all thought the same, how boring of a world would we live in? It would be pretty boring, I think. On election day, on the 3rd, the Independence Express will have a van at each location that will transport individuals to their polling places, from the independent living centers. I know there's going to be one here in Niagara County. There's probably more than likely will be, I'm guessing, multiple in Erie County. And there will be, I'm sure, probably going to be one in Batavia as well. But to transport individuals to and back from back to the independent living center, to their polling place and back, so they can vote and be productive, or be in the participate in the mainstream of the community and the society, which is empowering in itself, because as a person with a disability, and I find it empowering to have my voice heard. So I'm gonna go on a limb and guess it's empowering for others to have their voice heard as well. And I know for me, I can speak for me personally. For about 3 months, I was totally nonverbal. And so it really makes being able to have my voice heard more important to me. As now, even though I'm not totally nonverbal. Also, if you have ballots to be delivered on election day, you could drop them off or call 8360822 extension 126. And they will make a plan with you to get your bills and get them so they can be dropped off and turned in.
Up front where he is. And there I am. I'm back.
Hi.
The reason you see me wearing a mask is because I had to take a break. WIVB Channel 4 is here to get information on how we're giving information on voting to voters with disabilities today. So I had to talk to them a little bit about that. But it's good to be back. Mark, we're waiting for candidates, are we not?
Yes.
Okay. And did we do Ed's video?
I thought we did a video.
Oh yeah, so we're waiting for people to enter backstage, and coming up should be Chris Jacobs, who said they needed to be there at 2:00.
Yeah.
Right. So before I left, we were talking about issues that were facing people with disabilities, and did we talk about? As I'm looking at my notes here. There we go. Yes, budgets. People want to know about the state budgets. So when we're talking about the budgets for services for people with disabilities, they come in some general categories. The major disability groupings in the general categories are people with developmental disabilities and people receiving services from the Office of Mental Health. They get separate agency budgets that parcel out services that people with disabilities need. Independent living is funded, not so oddly, by the state education department. So when we're talking about state budgets and we're talking about the 20% withhold right now is the big issue. The 20% withhold involves the government saying because of COVID, we're $60 billion in debt. We can't pay out anything that isn't federally mandated. There's no money. So when we do our reimbursement for our contract cycles, we're just going to reimburse you temporarily 20% less. And if the fiscal situation improves, you'll get that money back. Well, obviously, 20% could make a difference in the way an agency performs a service. So the people that we should be talking to coming up, especially our federal representatives, have a lot to say about state or county aid, which is the big issue that's been floating around in the bills like the CARES Act. Okay, so that's your quick hit about the budgets. And in the live conversations we have, assuming people start getting in backstage, we are going to ask them about what their opinions are on the budgets. I also have a note here from our intrepid Jillian Moss to remind folks about what we're going to do to help you cast your ballot, because educating is only the first step. Casting the ballot is the thing that's really important. So remember, there are 3 ways you can vote. Right now is early voting. Early voting locations are out and accessible and active, and you can go to an early voting location and cast your ballot. If you want to go to an early voting location and you need assistance with getting there, Independence Express can help you do that. All you got to do is give us a call, 836-0822, extension 150. For those people that use ride-sharing services, I understand that Lyft is offering free rides to polling places for people that wish to cast their ballots, so that you should be looking for your app for more information about that. The second way to vote that we'll talk about is actual election day, just like doing it like any other year. Going to your polling place and casting your ballot on election day. That's what I'm going to do. Just as in early voting, West New York Independent Living is scheduling folks to get them to their polling places on election day. So if that's what you want to do, people that wish to cast their ballots. Did I echo? There we go. We will schedule you to get you on a vehicle to get you to your polling place for Election Day. Again, that's Independence Express, 836-0822 extension 150. Now, there are a bunch of people at home saying, look, I might not want to go to my polling place. I might not want to go to the early voting locations. I'm concerned about COVID. I'm concerned about where the early voting locations are. That's okay. You can get an absentee ballot. Even if you're a person with a disability who needs assistance in filling out a ballot, you can get an absentee ballot. You can make a request from the County Board of Elections for an accessible absentee ballot. They'll send you some envelopes, an electronic ballot that you can use in your home to fill out ballot locations, right? But once you fill out the ballot and you put it in the envelopes, right, you got two choices. You can either pop it in the mail, or once again, you can call us. Western New York Independent Living will pick up your appropriately sealed ballot for you and assist you in getting it to a place where it can be dropped off and counted as a ballot. Okay. I believe I have mentioned all of those options to get that out there. Okay. And this is the service that we're providing in all of our counties: Erie, Niagara, Genesee, Wyoming, and Orleans counties. Any other questions from the feed, Jillian?
Anthony is here.
Who's here?
Anthony.
Oh,
Katie.
well, Anthony, let's bring him up.
Hello, how are you? Good afternoon.
3 years in a row.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I skipped the year for county legislature last year.
Well, it's all right. It's good to have you back.
Thank you. It was great seeing you again. And thank you for all the work that y'all do.
Thank you so much. So let's talk about your running for office for Assembly in 140, right?
Absolutely. Yes, under the Green Party. Thank you.
So why don't we do the opening? Why don't you talk to us about why we should elect you to the 140th district, and then we'll ask some questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as usual, I fight for the cultivation of cannabis, and I would co-sponsor the Marijuana Regulation Taxation Act introduced by Crystal Peoples-Stokes, the majority leader. And I would push for an amendment for 99 plants to be homegrown. This would, in my opinion, stop monopolization like we've seen in the medical industry. And sorry if my daughter interrupts in any way.
That's all right.
And I think that 99 plant home grow would help with the minority community and the frontline communities who have faced arrest through all these years to be included in the industry, where they might not have enough startup capital to get into the industry. I would also co-sponsor the New York Health Act, and that Health Act would allow for everybody to be insured. And I think especially during a pandemic, it's extremely important for everybody to have health insurance for preventative treatments so that they don't end up in the hospital and overburden the health infrastructure. That is Assembly Bill A5248A, and I would most definitely co-sponsor that as soon as I got into office. I would also co-sponsor the New York State Off Act, so that would get New York State off fossil fuels and be 100% sustainable by 2030. I think that this is extremely important because we need better air quality standards in New York, and a big contributor to pollution is actually just transportation. So if we were to get off fossil fuels and convert to 100% clean energy, then we could have a much cleaner air quality, especially from just traffic pollution. So that bill is Assembly Bill 3565, so I would most definitely co-sponsor that. And then another bill that I think is extremely important, especially when we're talking about the funding for the Office of People with Disabilities, is I would definitely co-sponsor the Assembly Bill 7791B.
70 people live on the feed. Sorry about that. I was
absolutely.
referring to our friends at Channel 4. I forgot to mute myself. Go on.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's Assembly Bill 7791B, and that would repeal the rebates for the stock transfer tax. So I think that, you know, we have way too much money that is being rebated to Wall Street, especially during a time where companies like AIG are not necessarily insuring businesses on all of the claims that are being filed due to the COVID pandemic. And I think that it's time for Wall Street to pay their fair share. I think that, you know, some of the funding could specifically be earmarked for the Office of People with Developmental Disabilities, but also for the campaign for Be Fair to Direct Care, so that we can actually pay a livable wage for those who provide direct services. So those are the bills that I would be focusing on. And I would definitely co-sponsor and, you know, push through and ask for committee votes and ask for full floor votes. And I would definitely be lobbying the governor directly to sign and support so that they can move through the legislature.
All right.
Okay. We're ready for some questions. You want to do the first one, Mark?
Sure. Should you be elected, would you be open and willing, or how would you be open and willing would you be, and how would you go about it? Creating positions for individuals with disabilities in your office.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would definitely have one staffer fully present at all office hours to take on any question from members of the community. I think that I would have a working relationship with any group that's working to try to hold the NFTA board accountable so that there's better transportation measures. So that's something that, if possible, I mean, if necessary, I would just take on, you know, myself completely with no staff help, just to coordinate efforts with the NFTA. And this is extremely important because I know it had been brought up in previous times that I've spoken at the Western New York Independent Living Candidate Forum about snow removal at bus stops and intersections. And I actually made the mistake of saying that I don't think it's too much of an issue in Tonawanda. But mistakenly, I was that at the corner of Sheridan and Delaware, there was an issue with snow barriers, and there would be people with walkers and canes walking in the street with, you know, vehicle traffic going at least 40, 45, sometimes 50 miles per hour with snowy conditions. That's a terrible situation. And even on Niagara Falls Boulevard, the snow removal has to be taken care of. I think that I had heard an interesting suggestion from somebody about how we need to have special types of vehicles that do snow removal just for sidewalks, and I've seen some of that downtown Buffalo. So it's possible that some of that could be implemented in other towns where there's a very serious neglect of intersections and walkways being cleared of snow. So, I mean, I would definitely have a staffer full-time for all office hours, specifically for the community with people with disabilities and developmental disabilities.
All right. What would you do to support the increase in accessible and affordable housing within our communities?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I mean, because housing access is extremely important for any community, especially for people with disabilities and developmental disabilities. So I think that we need to have a model of inclusionary zoning where any new, whether you have a section of housing stock or even just a specific building there needs to be inclusionary zoning of either 20 or 30% for lower income, senior, and for people with disabilities or developmental disabilities. I think that we need to really focus on taking care of any land that's not being utilized and start building more housing stock. I think that we need to have rent control ordinance measures at the county level so that any type of rent increase will have a certain percentage of that go back into the property so that we don't have as much dilapidating housing. And this might actually allow for more investment in housing to have accessibility for people with developmental disabilities or just disabilities. So I think that Santa Monica, California has a rent control ordinance that I think we should try to implement most of that, and specifically the measure I spoke about in terms of having a certain percentage of the rent increase go back to the property. I think that the inclusionary zoning is important, but also, you know, we need to hold developers more responsible in terms of when any of the local development agencies give out tax incentives. So there should be a stipend or a stipulation, within any of these projects that have tax abatements or tax savings or, you know, some type of incentive. I think that there should be a stipulation to include that type of apartment building with you know, availability to people with disabilities or developmental disabilities as well. So thank you. That was a great question, and I wish more people would talk about that issue.
You're welcome.
Next question comes from our chat, talking about funding in COVID. So the way I'm going to phrase this is, you know, the state's stance about the amount of debt the state is in due to COVID expenses. Okay. And that the state in a lot of areas has done what's called a 20% withhold on state funding for activities, including services for people with disabilities. What do you think the state's role should be? My apologies. To get services during COVID to people in the communities?
Well, it should be extremely important. Thank you for that question. And I mean, I did point to the repeal of the state the stock transfer tax to repeal the rebate for that. So I think that that would be a huge funding source in the billions of dollars. I mean, I'd also have been talking about for many years the legalization of cannabis, and I think the Marijuana Regulation Taxation Act would bring in $500 million every year in funding. My concerns with the legalization of cannabis is that, you know, it shouldn't be just put in the general fund. I would support any legislation or amending legislation to actually put that funding into the Office of People with Developmental Disabilities, or any of the non-for-profit services that provide direct services, or even for the Be Fair to Direct Care campaign. I think that there should be specific legislative intent and specific legislative enumeration within the bill to direct that funding appropriately. I also think that the repeal of to rebate the stock transfer tax, I think there should also be language included specifically to try to help alleviate this discussion of a 20% cut in services, because I don't think that that should happen at all, especially during a pandemic. This is insanity. I do believe that by having the New York Health Act, I think that that would help, and not with the funding per se, but I think that over the long term, it would help with not overburdening the healthcare infrastructure, so that we could have more funding to the direct services for preventative treatment, or for those who are not living in facility, who are independently living, to have more of the funding for those services. So we're not just trying to, you know, catch up with the funding for the healthcare infrastructure for the actual in-hospitalization phase.
Alrighty. Another question from our feed talks about what happens if the current administration, federal administration, continues. As a state legislator, what will you do to fight an administration that blocks state funding?
I would absolutely be writing letters directly to the White House. And, I would include personal stories from people that I've come across when I've done my door-to-door, specifically in my district, Riverside, I've been focusing on this year. And, there are so many issues that community faces in terms of being a food desert. So any types of cutting and funding for the services that they already rely on beyond just the actual troubles that they're facing beyond the fight for those services, I would make sure that the White House gets a letter from me directing them to, discuss with the constituents that I represent the problems they face, especially with any additional cuts from the federal government. And I would absolutely put in that letter that we spend so much on our military in terms of foreign military interventionism, when that needs to be spent at home so that we actually take care of our population. I think that we need a strong national defense. And I know that my family has fought in every major war going back to World War I, besides the Korean conflict. And I think that my family recognizes, anyone who has served in my family has recognized that we need to take care of our people at home, and we need to stop spending so much money on the interests of the few for these foreign military conflicts. I would definitely make sure that that was put into a letter to the White House. In terms of other fights, I would just try to get the legislature to also echo the voices of our constituencies with formal resolutions to Congress if the Senate continues to not try to focus on funding, and also resolutions to the White House as well. So I think that there are some small ways to echo the voices of the people and magnify the voices of the people.
And I think that that's a good place to end it. I want to thank you for coming. I wish you best of your luck in your candidacy.
Yes.
I know that I would normally ask as a last question, what would you do if you lost? But I know you continue to fight in the community to get people's voices heard. So I have no doubt we'll be seeing you again, one way or the other.
Thank you. I really do appreciate the work that you all do, and I really appreciate your time and for having me come to speak, as you always have. I've learned so much.
It is our pleasure. Thank you so much.
Have a great day and stay safe, guys.
Bye-bye. So now we're going to transition to our next live representative, who is Chris Jacobs, Congressman in the 27th Congressional District. Congressman Jacobs, thank you so much for being with us today. We apologize for the confusion.
Oh, no problem. Hi, Todd.
How are you?
I'm great, thank you. Thanks for having me.
So we normally start with the 2 to 3 minutes of whatever standard campaign planks you like, and then we have some questions for you.
Well, it's great to be here. I've come before this organization. It's been my honor to come before you on several occasions. When I ran for Senate most recently, and county clerk prior to that. I may have come earlier than that on the school board when I ran for the Buffalo School Board, not sure, but certainly interacted with you at that capacity. I've been in Congress now for 3 months. I won in the special election in June and took office in mid-July. Been very busy trying to get that office back operational. When I launched my campaign a year and a half ago rather, I stated that this region deserved full representation, and at that point the incumbent couldn't fully represent, I didn't think, because of legal challenges he had, and we needed a representative who could serve on committees and be a strong voice. When I got into office, I realized that actually all the offices had been closed and staff all let go. So I've been very busy getting the offices back up and running. I'm nearly fully staffed back down in Washington, and so legislating and being active down there. And as important, or more important, since with COVID and all that's going on, is the district offices here, so we can get back to the casework and constituent needs. And there's a lot of them. So we've processed over 300 casework files. But I look forward to continuing to serve in Congress. I hope I get elected in November to be able to serve a full term. I believe my experience serving in a very local level government as a school board member, county level, as Erie County Clerk, state level, and I have previously served at the federal level, not an elected office, but at the Department of Housing and Urban Development. That was my first job right out of college. So that combined with private sector experience, nonprofit experience, I started a scholarship fund in the area called the Bison Fund, and also was a co-founder of one of the first charter schools. I believe my diversity experience in the public sector, the private sector, and government makes me equipped to have the experience necessary to be an impactful representative for this region. That's what I'm going to try to do if elected for a full term.
Okay, that's a wonderful beginning. I'm going to start with a question that I have. I know as a current congressman and part of the Republican minority, there's a lot of discussion about what's happening in local communities with COVID, and especially in terms of the argument about continued stimulus funding. And the congressman is, of course, aware that state services, including those that our community depends on, are taking a hit on a 20% withhold. But there seems to be some resistance trying to move forward with state and local funding. And I know you've got an opinion about that, so I wanted you to be able to get that out there for us.
Sure. I think I've met with almost every one of my local governments and had online calls with school districts, and the problems and challenges they have are real and need to be addressed. It was not their fault that all the businesses got shut down. That was a government act, and that caused the situation with sales tax revenue going down and so forth. I am fully supportive of an additional stimulus bill. I'm also a co-sponsor of the SMART Act. Tom Reed is one of the leads on that, which was more targeted funding just for state and local governments to deal with that issue. If we couldn't come to an agreement on an overall stimulus bill, to at least get that done, because we really can't wait. Our local governments are really at wit's end financially. I was hopeful that this would get done prior to the election. It seems like it's clear it's not going to. I hope soon after November 3rd, we will come together and get something done. And, I know that there's some on my side, mostly at the Senate, who are really adamant about not wanting to, quote unquote, bail out poorly run state governments, that were already in had financial problems. I think it's very easy to be able to distinguish what was a source of COVID and what was not a source of COVID. So New York State had a bit of a deficit for sure, but their deficit ballooned as a result of COVID. So we can insist, I would hope, come to agreement on a system on what was clearly COVID related. I also believe, as we talk about just the CARES Act, both the state of New York and many local counties still have a lot of CARES Act funding because there was such stringent requirements put on that, or stringent limitations, that it could only go for COVID related expenses, and COVID related expenses did not include revenue loss. So I've been talking with some of my members to say, look, let's broaden that a little bit to allow these funds to go where they're needed. Many of these governments are reining back in new expenditures because of loss of revenue. So, but to go back to the bigger question, I certainly hope, and I will be advocating as strong as I can, that a full-fledged additional stimulus is passed soon after November 3rd.
Okay. A question from our Facebook feed, talking about your support for the president. There seems to be some the comments about the fact that you've been very supportive of the president in the past, but haven't heard much about that in the campaign. So from a statement of assisting people with disabilities, for example, how do you think the president's done?
Well, I've said I'm clearly supportive of the president, his national policies, his policies of getting our economy going, the tax reform he did, in terms of standing up on the international stage for the United States, pushing for trade deals that are good for our region, like the new trade deal with the replacement of NAFTA, which is going to really help our automotive sector here, and our in my district that I represent, the dairy is going to be very significant because it was removed a lot of dairy tariffs over in Canada, and also an awareness about the concern about China, that we need to take a different tack with them. The disabled community, I would say I would like to hear from the community more on what their take on it is. I can tell you I will be as strong an advocate for the disability community as a member of Congress as I was in the Senate, and that came from trying to meet as much as possible with organizations affiliated with this movement. And I would say, you know, my first term in the Senate, I worked very hard in terms of the Be Fair to Direct Care campaign, recognizing the desperate need to raise salaries of those workers. And I would say that of my first 2 years in the Senate, that was the biggest accomplishment I was most proud of. So I think we need to do more. Clearly, we need to do more. I was glad there was some funding in the CARES Act, which was a three-way negotiation, which, you know, the administration had a role in, but there needs to be more to be done there.
All right, the last question for a congressman is going to come from Mr. Shaw. Mark?
All right. Well, you said that you've been working hard to get your offices back up and running and open, and restaffed. If you're elected again, will you have individuals with disabilities on your payroll and your office staff? And also, do you have any at this point?
That's a good question. I do not at this point have anyone. I'm very amenable to that. I certainly had workers when I was county clerk. And I think it's very important as a broader community. We need to do more broadly in terms of advocating for the employment of the disabled community. My understanding, we still have a very, very low rate of employment, about 19% of employment compared to the national or the average of the broader community. And we need to, and the funding should go for this too, to make sure there's sufficient outreach to our employers, public and private, of the value of the disabled community as a workforce. And everybody I've talked to that has a workforce with the disabled community always says what a great workforce they are. I did want to mention another issue that I think is very important. Well, two issues with this district. Two that they really cut across the district broadly, and it ties into a lot of things, but employment as well. And that would be the need for better internet, high-speed internet in this district, or rural broadband as they call it. Much of the community is woefully completely without or very intermittent, weak service, and that is impacting kids who are trying to go to school remotely, telehealth, but also working remotely. In which this is going to be, we'll get back to some normalcy, but people are going to work remotely more, and this is an opportunity for the disabled community as well. We need to invest in that infrastructure across this district and across the country. And the other issue I want to be involved with is trying to improve the situation in terms of transportation. Transportation in NY27 that I represent is largely a rural area, and transportation is not where it needs to be for the broader community. It's certainly not where it is for the development of the disabled community. And in that regard, I was placed on and asked to be on the Agriculture Committee, which is one place I think I can advocate for this. but I'm also pushing very hard to get on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, which I think would be a great complement to agriculture to advocate for improved transportation broadly, transportation, paratransit, and so forth.
Well, Congressman, as you've been talking, I've had other questions come across the feed, but I've run out of time and I have people standing backstage. So I do want to let our viewers know that any questions that you submit, we will send to the Congressman and post his responses, because we want to make sure any question you have for him, he has the opportunity to answer. Congressman, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. I wish you the best of luck in your campaign.
Great. Thank you very much, everyone. Look forward to working with you in the future.
Love to. Okay. Thank you so much for coming in. Next up, we have State Senator Patrick Gallivan, incumbent in the 59th Senate District. There we go, Senate District. Are you there, Senator Gallivan? There you are.
I think I am. Yep. Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay,
always a pleasure to have you here. As always, you get your 2 or 3 minutes for open, and then we'll have some questions for you.
Okay, thanks, Todd. Good afternoon to Todd and Mark, who I see your almost smiling faces, and to everybody else, of course, who I can't see but is online with watching this with interest, I hope, because it's so important that people participate and people vote. So I certainly hope that that people are participating, and I encourage you to vote if you haven't. A lot more opportunity this year with absentees having been expanded with early voting, and then of course the old-fashioned way just on election day itself. I remain honored to represent the 59th district in the state Senate, to have the trust of the people to trust me to be their voice. The district includes Southern Erie County, all of Wyoming, the northern part for the most part of Livingston County, and then a couple towns in the southern part of Monroe County. While we have district boundaries, I don't focus just on the district. I look to work for the community, being the voice of the roughly 300,000 people in the Senate district, and always try to make sure that I'm considering the larger Western New York community, which would include the greater Buffalo and the greater Rochester area, in my decision and in my votes. We're going through a lot right now. The pandemic, I think, overshadows everything. And obviously it's very concerning, first for people's health, and then secondly for the health of the businesses that employ all of the people in our community. I think we have real challenges there. I'm going to come back to that in just a moment. Separate from that, I'm concerned statewide about public safety, some of the changes in the laws and the negative impact it's had on public safety, given my background in law enforcement. And then, of course, our economy, which takes in many, many things, including the size and cost of government, some impediments to business, trying to help businesses succeed in creating opportunities for everybody so that there is employment and we can enjoy our lives and support ourselves and take advantages of what our country is and what our community is and what it's intended to be. The single biggest issue I think we face right now, though, is the pandemic in New York State governance. The governor has emergency powers. I think they have gone on for too long. We've seen unilateral implementation of some of the directives that have a direct impact on everybody, including all of those that rely in any way, shape, or form on funding from the state. We see a withholding of, in many particular cases, especially the not-for-profits, withholding of 20% of the money, a decision just made by the government, with the legislature standing by and not exerting its authority. And I think the legislature needs to stand up and exert its authority. We need to have more people standing up and trying to push on the legislative leaders to call us back and essentially to restore our government to the check and balance intended by the state constitution. I know you have a number of questions. I could continue to talk for a long, long time, but out of respect for everybody, here, and then of course your process. I will try to answer, Todd, whatever questions you choose to ask, and address any other area that I haven't touched on yet.
I did want to give you a minute because of your experience as a former Erie County Sheriff. What you thought of what changes you would think would be needed in the relationship with law enforcement. You know, people with disabilities have a high degree of interaction with law enforcement. And, you know, we're concerned about changes that might need to be made in law enforcement. But I'm very curious, as an ex-Erie County Sheriff, what you would agree needs to change.
Well, I would say, well, a lot needs to change, but I would put priority on communications. Communications between law enforcement and the community. Interesting, Sir Robert Peel he's from England, and back in the 1800s, he's known as the father of modern day policing. One of the things he said, though, was that the police are the community and the community are the police. And that is something I've always believed in. And then when I was a police executive, as the sheriff, I tried to impart that upon the agency first and foremost. Now, we are way more complicated than what I'm going to say right now, but think back to the Andy Griffith show, Mayberry RFD. You've got a person in Andy Griffith, the sheriff, who cared about the community. And he tried to help people. He tried to engage with people. He treated everybody with respect and tried and listened to everybody. And he went about it trying to help the community and trying to keep people safe. He did it without disrespect. He did it with complete respect. And he also did it at the same time with cooperation of the community. Now, how do you do that with large agencies? How do you do it statewide? How do you do it nationwide? I think police training has to focus on communication skills. We do have a separate issue that has crept in during my career that has been very problematic, and that is what we've seen more and more mental health related issues attached to violations of law. And those, if we go back into the 80s and we saw, when we saw the closure of a lot of the mental health facilities and people being reintegrated back into society, the promise then was that there would be community-based services to help with that reintegration. And so that people could get the necessary services. And then, of course, we could live in communities side by side. The state failed on that. And what we then saw was, for the people that didn't have somebody to love them or take care of them, make sure that they take their medicine, where did they go? Out on the streets. And where did they end up? In jails, which is certainly not the place for them. So I think police training does have to focus on personal communication skills. We have to have a lot more training for law enforcement in the area of mental health. And then, of course, they still do. That's not to simplify it, because there's still all these issues that they have to deal with, and they're very challenging issues. And for the police officer on the street, it's extremely challenging. But communication skills, first and foremost, I think, are the most important.
I think, and that's a very important answer. Last question, though, for you, because believe it or not, the 10 minutes has flown right by. But as with all the previous candidates, we're going to send you questions that come in the feed to allow you in the campaign an opportunity to answer them. I can say for the record that you've always been very responsive to this stuff for us. But the last question we've got is with regard to healthcare, right? As a state senator, what can you do in the event that something bad happens to the Affordable Care Act? Getting a lot of questions about the Affordable Care Act all over the feeds today for all the candidates. And I know it's a federal issue, but if in the event something bad happens to that, what do you see your role as a state senator being?
If I'm not mistaken, the legislature in the state essentially codified a number of the provisions of the Affordable Care Act in New York state law, just in the event that didn't take place. Now, I may be mistaken about that, but I think that that it was something that was passed in sometime in the past 1 or 2 sessions of the legislature. But putting that aside, I think that New York State has done well in access to healthcare and trying to reach people. I think that we are now pre-pandemic, and I don't know what's taken place over the past several months, but I think that we were over 95% or about 95% of people had some form of coverage. The work, of course, should be to identify and connect with those who don't have the coverage to make sure it's available. Now, when it's available, we have to have it accessible. It has to be quality care. It just can't be care for the sake of care, and it has to be affordable. Some of the people that are in that 4 or 5% that don't have care don't have the care because they choose not to, but because they choose not to, because it's not affordable to them. The young professional, right? The person in the 20s, early 30s without a family that's invincible and looks at the high cost of care and what their co-payments might be. But I think we have to focus on those things, making sure that healthcare is available for everybody, accessible. It's available and accessible for everybody, that it's quality and that it's affordable. And I do think New York State is ahead because of the legislation passed, is ahead of most states in that regard. In the event the federal government says, okay, out the door. Not so simple in New York because it's been codified, I believe.
Wonderful. That's a great answer and a great ending to our time together. Senator Gallivan, we thank you very much for coming today. Wish you best of luck in your campaign.
Thanks, Todd and Mark.
I know this isn't the last time we're going to see each other, so until we meet again, stay safe.
Yes.
You as well. Thank you.
Bye-bye. All right, next up, Mr. Dwayne Whitmer, also running for the 27th Congressional District, where the incumbent Congressman Jacobs was just on. Mr. Whitmer,
hey
nice
guys,
to have you with us today.
No, thank you for having me. It means a lot. Thanks for inviting me to be here. I'm glad to be here.
It is absolutely our pleasure. As you know, you get 2 to 3 minutes to talk about whatever plank you'd like, and then we have some questions for you.
Absolutely. I'll make it quick because I want to get to the questions. But yeah,
Yep.
I'm Dwayne Whitmer. I am the Libertarian nominee. I'm running third party, running on a campaign of, the two-party system has essentially failed us. Republicans win Republican races, Democrats win Democratic races. They use each other as the boogeyman. The right says Nancy Pelosi is the boogeyman. The left says Mitch McConnell is the boogeyman. They work together for never-ending spending, never-ending debt, never-ending war, and don't really solve any of our problems. Wages have stayed stagnant. And so I decided that building the Libertarian Party, building a competitor to the two-party system, which has perpetually failed, will allow them to start taking more of us seriously. As they start to lose voters, they're either going to adapt their policies to change and benefit the voters more, or they're going to lose races. And I'm okay with that. It's like I'm own an accounting firm. I'm a business owner. If you like my business, you're going to come to it. You're going to give me money. If my service struggles or my product struggles, you're going to go somewhere else. And it should be like that with voting. We need to start voting for the best candidate and the best policies, and not because the letter after someone's name is what you're registered as.
Okay. So let's start with the hot button questions for the congressional district. Can you tell us what your stance is on the Affordable Care Act, please?
Yes, I think that the only thing the Affordable Care Act did well was cover pre-existing conditions. Everything else was kind of poorly done. It was a beautifully written Ponzi scheme to shift wealth from the taxpayer to the corporations that own hospitals and insurance companies, as evidenced by costs didn't go down, quality of care didn't get better. It was kind of a pretty big failure on that regard. Crony capitalism strikes again, where people bought politicians and got bills passed to benefit themselves under the facade of helping the general public.
Okay. Now, not a lot of people recognize they may hear the Libertarian Party but don't necessarily know what it means. So in 30 seconds, can you talk about what the standard planks for the Libertarian Party are?
Yes, we are pro freedom and individual choice. So the libertarian mindset is you can be as liberal or conservative as you want, just don't force other people to think and be like you. We generally believe that the individual can lead their life better than bureaucrats and politicians from DC or Albany, as evidenced by, while in NY27, Chris Lee resigned, Chris Collins is going to jail. In New York State, Spitzer, Skello, Schneiderman, they're all going to jail or resigning in shame. The Republican House leader just resigned. These people can't run their own lives, yet they're in charge of regulating everything we do. The Libertarian Party wants to bring the power back to the people and let them understand that, you know, they have a right to run their own life with less government interference.
Okay, so if you win the congressional office for District 27,
yes,
a lot of the interaction you're going to be having with people with disabilities is the necessary funding and operation of the programs that serve them.
Yes.
So to give you an example, there's been a bill proposed for the last few years that is meant to provide increasing opportunity for people with disabilities to live in the community rather than institutions.
Good. Yes.
Okay. So what would your thought be on how you would advocate for services for people with disabilities once in federal office?
If I won, I would do two things. I don't have much interaction with the disabled community. I don't know much about them. My sister actually works in a group home herself, so she has a lot of interaction with them. And actually, we have a libertarian running for state senate in District 52, I believe. His name's Tom Queter. He's actually disabled. He's in a wheelchair. His legs don't work. I would bring him on my policy team, and I would make sure that he's representing us and working with us directly. I want to work with the community. I need to make sure that they're being part of the platform. They're being part of the policy team. It's not a bunch of bureaucrats who don't have interaction with the community or don't have any relation to this community. This community needs to be represented in the policies, so we're making policies that directly benefit them. So I would bring Tom in. I'd bring my sister in. I would bring people from this community in to hear their actual concerns, and modify policies and plans around directly benefiting them.
Okay. Mark, I'm going to give you the cleanup question in the minute after this one, so I just want you to prep up.
All right.
Dwayne, talk to me a little bit about what you think with regard to police reform.
Yes.
People with disabilities have as negative interactions sometimes with the police as other minority groups. So I'd like to hear what your thoughts are.
So the issue we have with police is that police are being used as revenue generation for a failed progressive big government policies. Politicians pass big government laws, big government regulations, and they rely on police to issue traffic tickets to generate revenue. As evidenced by what happened in Philadelphia yesterday, police aren't guidance counselors. They're not mental health professionals. It's not what they're trained to do. Police are trained to respond to a violent threat with violence. That is it. In regards to police reform, what we need to do is make sure there are other agencies designed and capable of handling situations like this. We need to start having the communication or the conversation about adapting and understanding that everything isn't black and white. A man with a knife doesn't necessarily mean harm, especially if there's mental health issues going on there, and start showing some empathy for the less fortunate and adapting policies and platforms that are going to help that. Instead of calling the police, which is our only line of defense, instead of making the police answer calls from a cat in a tree to an armed robbery, maybe start to develop or have mental health professionals working with the police so there's a better first response, so that doesn't come to violence. One thing I learned today, actually, I did an event today and the police showed up because I had a podium in a public park, and apparently that's against the law now. Buffalo police don't have tasers. They have no non-lethal ability to stall a situation. They only have guns. Well, if there's no option for non-lethal, there's no way to control certain situations. It's either lethal or not, and there's no in between. And that's something that we need to have I'm planning on doing an event about this and learning more about this. I just learned today. But that is something we need to have a serious conversation about, is that if police don't have tasers or a form of non-lethal response, well, then they only have one response, and that's lethal, and that's not a good sign. So.
Okay. The last question is for my compatriot, Mr. Shaw. Mark?
All right. On the employment, in the employment arena,
the employment question, right, Mark?
Yeah. How will you help individuals with disabilities increase employment opportunities, and would you also employ individuals with disabilities in your office?
First thing, yes. If I was to win, yes. The first thing I would do is bring Tom Queter into my campaign staff to help me with policies and outreach into these communities. Absolutely, I would. The second thing I would do to help employment with the disabled community is allow tax credits, tax breaks for employers to hire disabled people. I think right now the biggest issue is breaking the stigma that the disabled community isn't capable of doing the same job that everyone else is. And I think that once we allow them to integrate into society better, hold jobs, live in their own homes, become part of a community, and have better interactions, you're going to see that stigma slowly get broken, and you're going to see them have more opportunities. So right now, my biggest issue is, the false stigma that's surrounding the disabled community. So I think that allowing employers to hire disabled people, allowing tax credits or some form of, work credit would be a great start.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Mr. Whitmer, thank you so much for taking time to be with us today. Good luck for your campaign in public office.
Thank you. We need it. I appreciate you guys having me on. Third parties are often ignored. So the fact that you guys invited me to be here, I wouldn't miss it. It means a lot to me. Thank you, guys.
It's a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you guys so much. Enjoy your day now.
You too.
Thank you.
All right. So he goes backstage, and to replace him, we have Mr. Nate McMurray. Where's Nate? Oh my God! Look at that smile. Is that actually live or what? There it is.
That's me. How you doing?
For a minute. All right. Mr. McMurray is the former Grand Island supervisor.
Yes, sir.
And running for Congress on the 27th Congressional District.
Yes, I am.
As always with Meet the Candidates Day, you get about 3 minutes or so to give any campaign planks you'd like, and then we have some questions for you.
Well, I heard the other candidates talk, and I had the advantage to hear them talk. And, I'll be honest, just because time is short, I'm going to cut to the chase.
Okay.
You're not telling the truth. These are people that voted against Medicare. I mean, Jacobs voted to stop, or he was one of the instrumental in stopping healthcare plans for New York State. He supports the president's budget that cuts Medicaid and Medicare and Social Security. And it's just, and even Senator Gallivan, I hate to be so blunt about it, but these guys are not doing anything to help the issues you guys care about. They're literally presenting a different worldview, and a worldview that's different than mine. My worldview is that I believe in the common good. I believe that government can do things to help our families and solve problems. In fact, without government, we don't really have community. Community is what government is. It's a way of binding us together and protecting those who are often in positions where they need the help of the community to support them. Even ever since John Winthrop first came to the United States, before there was an America, the first immigrants to come here, John Winthrop, coming to Massachusetts, said on the boat, we need to bear each other's burdens. We need to protect each other. We need to work with one another. The Constitution, our founding documents, say to form a more perfect union. And these politicians are presenting a different view. Their view is the private sector can solve all of our problems, and the public sector is bad, government is bad. I don't agree with that. I believe we've cut government to the point where it cannot provide the services required. And then when it's asked to do something, from policing to healthcare or anything else, it's unable to do so. And then everyone says, oh, government is bad. Well, the truth is we have the worst, most inefficient, most expensive healthcare system in the world that still doesn't cover everybody. We give away tax cuts to the richest Americans without thinking about it while they continue to concentrate wealth, and we do nothing for everybody else. If we taxed the top 400 people, just 5% of their wealth, just 5% of their wealth, the Jeff Bezoses of the world, we could end poverty in America and provide every single American health care. So I'm not for some radical system. I'm not for communism. I'm for common sense. And I was getting angst-driven sitting here because I think that we can do so much better than we're doing. And when I hear politicians wring their hands about what's not happening, I'm like, you guys are responsible. And I'm willing to go to Washington and make changes for regular people, working people like me. I was born one of 7 in Niagara County. My father passed away when I was 4. We survived because of Social Security survivor benefits. I'm a working class person, a product of the working class, and I will fight for the working class. And I'll fight for the issues the people on this call today care about. And with that, I'm happy to take your questions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. We're going to start with a question coming from the feed. Can you give me what your opinion is about the movement to, quote unquote, defund the police?
I don't support defunding the police.
Okay.
However, President Trump is defunding the police right now by there is no stimulus plan. He can make excuses about it, but the House has to negotiate with the Senate and the president, and they've been impossible to negotiate with. As a result, you're seeing horrific situations where not only the police are being defunded, but so is the highway department and the rec parks and rec department and just every other part of our government because there is no support. Regarding the police, I believe there needs to be changes to the way we police in this country. I think we need to demilitarize the police, not defund the police, demilitarize the police. I'm the only candidate for NY27 that has experience working with the police directly. I was the commissioner of police in my small town. And I understand how difficult their job is. We have to fund the police so they can do their job. At the same time, we need to demilitarize the police. I think across the country, it's considered, it's as if in some communities they're an occupying force rather than part of the community. And I think by just doing that alone, it could go a long way to making the police more part of our communities and more the way it's supposed to be as part of building the common good.
Okay. The next question is a disability related question because I know you're a firm supporter of the Affordable Care Act, but you're talking now to people with disabilities, the single center of, for example, pre-existing conditions. We know it's the most expensive healthcare system and it still doesn't serve anybody. But as congressman, what would you do to improve services for people with disabilities to keep them out of nursing homes and institutions?
Well, I have members of my own family who suffer from disabilities, severe disabilities. And I understand how important it is for people to be with their families. And this is a personal issue for me. So I will be open to all legislation to help the disabled community be more part of our lives and be with us and the people they love. Beyond that, I want to talk about pre-existing conditions. And I'm going to say this as clearly as possible. Congressman Jacobs voted to fund the lawsuit that President Trump is bringing to remove protections on pre-existing conditions. Now, he seems like a nice guy, but that's what he voted to do. He did it. He voted against COVID sick pay, and he fought healthcare on the state level, and now he's doing it on the federal level. He doesn't understand what most people are going through and how important it is to have those protections. And he says, oh, I'm for pre-existing conditions, but his votes belie that fact. He's against pre-existing conditions, according to his voting record. And he supports President Trump, who doesn't have any alternative to the Affordable Care Act. He's been promising it for 5 years. We still have nothing. So I think it's a matter of priorities. My priorities is the health and well-being of the people I represent, not some type of ideology about big government versus, the private sector. No, just throw that all out of there. That's political talk. How can I help people here? And I can help people here by making sure they can get coverage and health care, and by making sure they can be with their families. And I promise you, and you can probably hear the sincerity in my voice, if I'm in office, I will always vote to protect pre-existing conditions and to make sure that you have the health care you need so you can be with the ones you love.
Alrighty. Mark, you want to do your cleanup question?
Sure. So, on the employment arena, what would you do as far as helping to create positions and or more positions for the individuals with disabilities should you be elected?
Well, I have had members of my campaign team that have disabilities, and some of my strongest and the most rewarding working relationships were with people with disabilities. So I'll do everything I can, and the biggest thing I'll do is I will listen to the people on this call, and when there's legislation that comes before me that you want to pass, and that you think your input would help me understand, my door will be open for you. And I'll be there to listen to you and talk to you because you know these issues better than I ever will. And you'll help educate me so I can be a better voter. What I need you all to do, and I pray that you do, is help me get in office. This is a tough race for a Democrat because this area has been taught that Democrats are bad and Republicans are good. That's why you got Chris Jacobs, or that's why you got Chris Collins in jail. People vote party line. And we need every single vote we can get. And I promise you that if you get me into office, I will be your friend and ally. And I will listen so that when there's opportunities to work together on new legislation to help the disabled community, that I'll be there for you.
I think that that's wonderful. And that's the way you're going to end our time together, Nate. Thanks so much for spending time with us today. As always, with all of the live candidates, I do have other questions in the feed I don't have time for. I will send those so that you and the campaign can answer them. You'll get them over the next day or two.
I appreciate it. Thank you, guys. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Thank you for coming. Appreciate it. All righty. Next up is Congressman Brian Higgins, incumbent representative for the 26th Congressional District. Congressman.
Sir, how are you?
Loving the look today.
Oh, thank you. I got a little dressed up. I had some events earlier today, and I'm pleased to be with you again.
Well, for the viewers, he's been to quite a few Meet the Candidates days, so he won't be surprised if I say, you got your next 2 or 3 minutes. What would you like to open with?
Well, I don't think there's a more important issue in this election, be it at the congressional level and at the national level, than the assault that this president and this White House is perpetrating against people with pre-existing conditions. 10 years ago, I supported the Affordable Care Act, and I am the first to recognize that it was a highly imperfect piece of legislation. But the context was, for 100 years, both Republicans and Democrats tried to advance healthcare reform with no success. But the one issue in a very complicated bill that dealt with a lot of issues was the one that said that you cannot deny people healthcare coverage, and you cannot charge exorbitant prices for that coverage for people with pre-existing conditions and people with developmental disabilities. That is a pre-existing condition. In many cases, not all, people are born into it. There is a genetic predisposition to that. Before the Affordable Care Act, an insurance company could deny you coverage. Or if you had a dependent parent on whose insurance policy you were included, they could say no because your kid was stuck with a developmental disability. And the irony in all of this is that the newest pre-existing condition is COVID-19. So this administration, through the Supreme Court, is trying to kill the only federal law that protects people, patient protections for pre-existing conditions. And yet, you have a president that in rallies with thousands of people is saying that he protects people with pre-existing conditions. He does not. He does not. Let me tell you the language that he supports. The language that he supports says an insurance company has to cover somebody that has a pre-existing condition, but the policy doesn't have to cover whatever treatments are related to the pre-existing condition. That's not covering people with pre-existing conditions. That's not providing patient protections for people that need protection more than anybody else. And that is a great assault being perpetrated on some 100 million Americans that have pre-existing conditions. This is a very, very important issue. And I support expanded Medicare, expanded Medicaid, because it's important for people with developmental disabilities. But you know what? Medicare and Medicaid always has covered people with pre-existing conditions. This administration and my Republican colleagues in Congress are trying to destroy the one law, the only law in America that protects people with pre-existing conditions.
Okay. First question from our feed. It talks about the stimulus. I know that you're a fan of services with people with disabilities. You've been very supportive on issues with us in the past, so full disclosure for our viewers. But the question they're asking is, how would you facilitate another stimulus? We, people with disabilities, are taking hit on our services now because the state budget has gotten to the point where there's a $50 billion deficit. Yeah. And we're looking for state aid and community aid desperately to fill that gap. But there's a delay in understanding that with regard to the stimulus. So what would you do to facilitate another stimulus?
Let me help put this in proper context. You know, we have a highly contagious infectious disease. In America, we're 5% of the world's population, but we have 25% of the COVID-19 deaths in coronavirus cases. We have a disproportionately high number. Americans aren't welcomed in Canada. Americans are not welcomed in 27 European countries for the exact same reason. We're viewed as super spreaders. And those countries and their leaders at the federal level have an obligation to protect the health and safety of their people. We had a White House that failed in that regard, and it's basically acknowledged. So I voted for the HEROES Act proudly. That was 5 months ago. That provided millions more to states, to counties, to cities that are expected in a time of national emergency to provide the resources to the federal government, or to the local governments. So you have a snowstorm. There's a national emergency declaration made. You have a flood. You have a hurricane. You have a pandemic. The reason why you have a national emergency, because it's the federal government's responsibility to provide the resources to the state and local level directly to respond on behalf of all of our people. So the HEROES Act, we started that bill. We didn't say take it or leave it. That's not how government works. We said it represented a starting point, not an end point. Mitch McConnell and his Republican conference in the United States Senate didn't think it was important enough to take up. They basically ignored it. There was a last-minute effort a couple of weeks ago, probably motivated by the oncoming election, to revive talks about another disaster relief bill, to no avail. To no avail. And that is a horrible tragedy, and I'll tell you why. This pandemic was a universal gut punch. Everybody was negatively affected by this. Because we failed to make investments in the National Institutes of Health toward developing a vaccine, toward developing a treatment, the only thing that we could do to protect our families and our fellow citizens is to physically distance, to wear a face mask, and to practice good personal hygiene. The coronavirus was the cause of SARS, severe acute respiratory syndrome 20 years ago. Why did we not invest in the National Institutes of Health, the largest funder of medical research, toward the goal of developing a therapy or a vaccine to avoid that? Had we done that, we wouldn't be dealing with the problem that we are. That we didn't is not the fault of the states, who, as you rightly point to, now have to reduce significantly state funding to programs like Medicaid, to other programs that help the developmentally disabled community throughout New York State, including and especially right here in Western New York. We have made great strides. I have personal experiences with one of the first community residences in all of Western New York in the mid-70s when my dad was a city council member. He stood up bravely when a lot of people in that community were opposed to that. You don't know why? Because people were fearful and they were exploiting other people's fears. Our property values will go down. These people are dangerous. Well, that passed. And it's on Buffum Street in South Buffalo, run by People Incorporated. I used to walk door to door when I was running myself many, many years after. I'd ask about how people on the street felt about the community residence run by People Incorporated on Buffum Street. One guy told me it's the best run household on the street.
Wonderful. That's a great answer. Normally I would have Mark go to the mop-up question, but we don't have an awful lot of time for it. So I want to be able to remind you, as I remind all the other candidates, because you appeared live today, if there are questions that come across the feed for you to answer, I am going to send them for your campaign to respond to. I appreciate the time that you've given us today. Thank you so much for coming and being patient so that we can technically get you on our feed.
Thank you very much. Keep up the good
Thank
fight.
you.
Good days are in front of us.
Absolutely our pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Now we have our last candidate on our list today. Now, we're not going to immediately end after our last candidate because viewers might have questions or comments that we want to be able to get into the feed. So our last candidate is Mark Glogowski, who is running for the 139th District in New York State Assembly. Mark, how are you?
Good. Thank you for inviting me on.
It's our pleasure. Normally in Meet the Candidates Day, we're going to give you a couple of minutes to start out with whatever general planks that you'd like to talk with people about, and then we're going to have some questions for you.
Okay. One of my primary goals in running for this position is to bring people to the awareness that we live with tyranny and we call it good government in action. There's all types of it, but one of the most dramatic is going to affect all of the third parties in the next year or two, and that's the legislation that was passed in the budget. It was passed unconstitutionally in the budget. They've raised the stakes for the bar for third parties and independent nominating bodies. We used to have to collect 3 times the number of signatures just to get our candidate on the ballot and to become recognized 50,000 votes for governor. They now decided the state parties have to have a presidential candidate, and they've raised the number of votes required to either 150,000 or 2% of the population. They also increased 9-fold the number of signatures we needed to collect and changed the time frame for when we collect them from the summer when people used to gather for fairs and carnivals and parades to April and May. It's going to be nearly impossible for any third party or independent nominating body to meet that standard. And as a result, we're going to be seeing third parties disappear very quickly in the next couple of years unless that legislation is successfully challenged. This doesn't really have much to do with the people that have disabilities and handicaps. But one of the things I wanted to point out in the beginning is that I don't like that terminology, disabilities and handicaps. That already underscores a barrier that they're never going to be able to get over. And people aren't going to be able to understand that don't have those disabilities or handicaps. And what I would like to do is start changing the technology to refer to them as challenged, physically challenged, mentally challenged individuals, because everyone can now relate. Because if you play a game, you're not familiar with the game, you do an entry level until you start become familiar with the rules. And then the challenge is there to move on. Everybody can relate to a challenge. But it's no different than what these people live with every day. Their challenges are, how do you go about making breakfast? What clothes should I wear? How do I get through this doorway that's too narrow? Those are challenges. And I think if people started looking at these people as having challenges, we can address the challenges and help them out. We can't help their handicap. We're physically unable to change their handicap situation, but we can address the challenges. And when you come to businesses, businesses have a challenge themselves. They have limited resources and they have to address their other customers too. We have standards now that they have to meet if they're going to allow the handicap to come into their building. They have to have special doors and special ramps, and they can't address those any other way. What we need to do, if we really want to bring these people into the community, now there's two different types of community that I'd like to address, but we want to bring them into the community that the businesses are in. We need to basically relax the zoning regulations and relax the government requirements so that these people can do the best they can to help with the challenges that people have. And I think you'll find that there'll be a lot more reception for these people with the physical and mental challenges. One of the things I'm really perplexed with is the concept of the community. One of the things you talked about was if people were in a mental institute or some kind of a physical institute run by the government, and then they're released, where do they go? Well, the problem is the community, they're in a government community, and you're looking for government to come up with a solution. 107 years of government solutions haven't solved the problem. And the predecessor on this show just said that, 100 years. What we need to do is address the challenges that the individual themselves have dealing with people with these special challenges. And so we need to look at the community of individuals, the populace out there, and say, what is their barrier to helping these people? They're coming out from a government institute and just being released on the street. What is the barrier for the people to help them out? And start addressing some of those barriers. The fact that they're just being released onto the street with no place to go, that indicates that inside that government community, there was no interaction going on for these people to make links with the rest of the community in the world. And we need to address that situation. We need to bring nonprofit organizations and religious organizations into those government facilities and start helping them integrate these people with special challenges back into the normal society. I just lost you. Hang on a second.
Todd?
No, you didn't. This is me forgetting to press the unmute button.
Okay.
I muted myself so that no one would be distracted while you were speaking. Actually, I'm going to let Mark ask the first question because he didn't get a chance to ask this question to the last candidate, and I think this would be a good one for you.
All right. With regard to employment, what would you do to ensure positions and expand positions for individuals with disabilities? And would you be willing to create a position or multiple positions in your office for individuals with disabilities?
Just a moment before you answer, because I want to make sure that it's explained. We've been asking this question all day. I've just gotten something on the feed asking why. So it's good education for you, Mark, and then I'm going to let you answer it. When we're talking about people with disabilities, there's a 60 to 70% number of people with disabilities that want jobs in the community but cannot get them. Okay, And up to this point, the single most consistent employer of people with disabilities is government in 55A or 55B jobs. So the question is brought to, how will you get more people with disabilities into the workforce?
Okay, there's actually two steps I would take. The first is the minimum wage is a real barrier for people with disabilities, primarily for two reasons. One, the employer is very resistant to bring somebody in and spend the time and effort, because it's his time and effort that's worth basically a fortune to him, to bring these people up to speed. So he's going to be training these people. He doesn't have the confidence really until he's actually used to these people to actually know what they can do. And so the whole purpose of having a graduated step payment is to allow the people to develop their abilities, their skills, to develop their work skills, to develop the technical skills they need to actually be productive. And then as they become productive, the employer is going to feel more and more confident as to paying them higher wages, knowing that they're getting a return on their dollar. That's basically the only way they can stay in business, is to have the employees make enough money as an employee so that they can cover all of the expenses, including the employee's pay. So there's a barrier there that needs to be breached, and the only way to breach it is to allow this graduated increase in terms of pay based on a graduated increase in terms of productivity. Now, I believe there are tons of things that people with any kind of a challenge, physical or mental, can do in a business. The problem is we can't spell them out quickly, and the government doesn't have to worry about making a profit. They can hire people and just keep taking taxpayer money and giving it, transferring it to these people and calling it a job. But in reality, that's not a productive way to employ people. And we need to do the transition. And I would like to focus on that transition. The other is a barrier that the individual themselves have. Once they start earning cash, all of a sudden, with $1 more, and they start losing benefits. And I think that standard has to go. We need to allow people to actually work for a while without losing benefits, so they know they have the security and they can go out confidently every day and try to earn a living, and then never cut their benefits until they have a security blanket of maybe 2, 4, 6 months of savings, so that should something happen, they can survive until they get back on the system. Otherwise, that barrier will never allow a single person with any kind of a challenge, physical or mental, from getting a job. So we need to take and actually address that situation, those two. We need to work with the employers and allow them to gradually increase the pay as the people prove themselves, and that's as the employer finds out what they can do. Sometimes they'll be very amazed at what these people can do. And they can accommodate, once they learn how to accommodate for their physical or mental disabilities, they can probably do a heck of a lot more than we could imagine. One of the people I greatly admire is Thomas Quitter. He's running for the Senate on the Libertarian line. And you need to look him up because he's my ideal. He has overcome challenges I could not believe I could face. And he's a fantastic person. And he demonstrates what people with these physical challenges can do in society. I hope I answered your question.
You absolutely did. Actually, it was quite a detailed answer, and you covered a lot of the other stuff that was coming across the feed in your earlier statement. And believe it or not, 10 minutes has flown by. You did great.
Okay, thank you.
Mark, I want to thank you for being with us today, and I wish you the best of luck on your campaign. As with all of the candidates, because you appeared live today, if there are any questions that they have in the feed that are not answered, I will send them back to you for you or your campaign to answer, okay?
Thank you for the invite. I appreciate it.
Oh, no, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for coming.
Okay. Good night.
Yeah, have a good night.
All right. That is the complete list of our slate for state or federal offices for our annual Meet the Candidates Day. I wanted to take a couple of minutes if there were some last comments that people have been patient on the feed would like to be able to give us. Remember, these are people that are running for office that we'll probably see again, or already have office and are making decisions that affect our lives. So again, we're doing this again for local issues on Friday from 1 to 4. It's not going to be as long as today. My counsel, Jillian's going to whisper in my ear how many people we have for Friday, right? Put it in the chat for me. As I pause. 6. So definitely another hour or so with candidates for local office. And the reason that those positions are important is because those are the positions that eventually rise to state or federal office. So it's great that we have you today. We want to have you come back again on Friday. As a reminder, any of the pre-records are going to be posted to our YouTube page for you to be able to view, because I know audio on some of them wasn't very good. And we will take questions on our feed that'll come to Mark or myself as advocates. We'll assemble them and send them to the campaign for you. If we get an answer, when we get an answer, in a lot of cases, we're going to let you know exactly what that answer is. Okay? Mark, what do you have that might be a wrap up today?
Well, an open invitation to come join us on Friday for Narga Cunningham candidates day.
Well, yeah, because you've been handling a lot of the local candidates coming up your way, haven't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. We want to thank you guys for your time and attention. Normally, I'm going to remind folks again, Independence Express is helping you get to the polling place either on early voting or on election day, and helping you carry your appropriately sealed absentee ballot to get it to the polling place so that it can be counted. For all that, all you got to do, 716-836-0822, extension 150. Mark, we have one last question before we go. One of the people on the feed want to know what kind of legislation can use to decrease institutionalization. To answer that question briefly, a lot of state and federal laws that are on the books right now are there to decrease institutionalization of people with disabilities. From the Medicaid redesign stuff that provides for the Olmstead housing subsidy, to Money Follows the Person, which we in this community call open doors, to items in the Affordable Care Act and the Community First Choice option, which the state is just getting around to looking at perhaps maybe implementing statewide sometime real soon, right, Mark?
Yes.
Okay. So there are all sorts of things in the hopper right now that can be used to decrease institutionalization, which is why we have to keep an eye on our candidates to make sure that they support those laws and they don't attempt to reduce them.
Yes.
Oh, look, scrolling. This is great. The more we work, the more they're scrolling. That's all we have, actually. I want to thank everybody who participated in the feed today, and we look forward to seeing you again Friday at 1 o'clock.
Yes. And Friday at 1 also, I just about to add Helen from Disability Rights New York is going to be presenting.
Oh, yeah, no, we can't forget Helen. Helen's going to be talking about how to use the accessible ballot marking device to vote. Right?
Yep.
Absolutely. And that, for those folks that don't know, that's Disability Rights New York, and they have the protection and advocacy contracts for the state, including the protection and advocacy to be able to make sure that you can cast your vote. Okay. Nod your head, Mark. You know what I'm talking about.
Yep.
All right. I think that's it, and we'll see you again on Friday afternoon. Thanks so much for tuning in to 2020 Meet the Candidates Day State Edition.